Well, thank you, Paige, and hello. This webinar is timely today because in the last week, the industry trade organization CAI, which is the Community Associations Institute, has been promoting the new Reserve Say standards through email and social media. I was part of that news blitz, speaking to a national audience of high-rise managers in Charlotte last week. Very enjoyable time there. If you don't know what the last Reserve Say standard said or what changed, or even that there were National Reserve Say standards, this webinar is for you. In my world, much has changed in the Reserve Say business in the last 2 years, and these standards reflect the new understanding of our responsibility to the industry. We're still here to guide associations just like yours safely and successfully into the future, making the present less stressful and the future more secure. But there will be some changes in the next reserve studies you see, and I'm here today to give you a heads up about those changes. This is the outline that we're going to follow today, why things changed, what changed, differences to expect, and I'll wrap it up. So let's start out with why things changed. In the beginning, the Reserve Say standards and the Reserve Say credential were formed, and that was back in 1998, 25 years ago. And that changed Reserve Says from being a cottage industry with a bunch of different consultants doing planning of one sort or another into kind of an organized profession where we had standard terms and definitions, standard calculations, and like I said, the RS credential to be able to designate who knew what they were talking about, who was a committed professional in that industry. But then everything changed June 24th, 2021, and I hope that date stands out in your memory because that was a day that Champlain Tower South tragically collapsed, and in that collapse, taking the lives of 98 people. And that's when the consequence of ignoring or underfunding reserves changed forever. It changed from an industry of guiding the budgets and cash flow associations into realizing that, wow, there's a real responsibility to care for these buildings physically. So that changed the consequences. And we all were aware, I believe, that we're tasking board members to run multi-million-dollar not-for-profit organizations, and we're asking them to do it generally untrained. And for decades, we were moving along, bumping along to the future, but I think we're now get a clear understanding of what could possibly go wrong, and things could go, as we saw, tragically wrong. And not just years, but decades of too many boards across the country kicking the can down the road, saying we'll let the next board worry about this or that or the other thing. And the worst that they were to fear was, oh, well, just another special assessment. And thinking about this slide made me think of the old Mad magazine and their mascot, Alfred E. Newman, who had the phrase, what, me worry? Just living life cavalier, not concerned about the future too much, and just moving along, again, just bumping along forward in the future. And we even have humor that follows the same theme. This is from the gogladly.com website, and it shows a real estate agent showing a couple a home at the Townhome Association and talking about, oh, this home is affordable. Rustic architecture, that's very kind. And as you can see, they aren't wasting the HOA dues on funding reserves. The hidden message is the dues here are low because they're not taking care of the place. And that's the beginning of that relationship that we all kind of knew, and maybe it affected property values, maybe it affected the monthly assessments, but that's pretty much as far as we thought it would go. And then there's this association, Aspen Creek. We're disorganized, sloppy, mismanaged, and that's just the way we are. Don't blame us for it. That's our style. And you can see the sign peeling. It's falling apart a little bit on the right side, a little bit of physical deterioration. But again, we hadn't really appreciated the magnitude of what physical deterioration could do when left neglected. And I want to address that for just a moment here. Physical deterioration is real. Mother Nature, Father Time, they really don't care if you're planning or not. because they're going to deteriorate the buildings. They're going to deteriorate everything around us. That's a non-negotiable. It's just going to happen. So deterioration is expensive. Your buildings are expensive. It's ongoing, but the magic word there is it's predictable. So you can at least work with it. It reminds me at my age of a television commercial I used to see long ago about a brand of filters going on automobiles, oil filters, air filters, and the theme there was pay a little now instead of a lot later. The whole idea is that your car is going to deteriorate, and to take good care of it with a Fram brand oil filter, that was going to help make your thousands of dollars of engine, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 engine, last a lot longer now that you have a $20 Fram oil filter. A nice little theme, and making that connection between taking good care of the property, of the asset, and it being a cost-effective choice for you. All right? And again, a connection. When we look backwards, we can see all these little connections that were there. Again, we just hadn't appreciated that it would take so many lives for us to grasp the reality of it. So CAI, National Trade Organization, has a research arm, and they publish periodic papers, scholarly papers on various projects. Maybe as simple as salary. It may be technology issues, but one that they published in April 2020, it was a multi-year study, was called Breaking Point, Examining Aging Infrastructure in Community Associations. So they know that the population of condominiums, townhomes, high-rises, HOAs across the country, they're getting older day by day. And they published it April 2020. Many of you may not know about it because March of 2020, the pandemic hit, and that became the big news. But this paper is there. If you want to find it, you can Google CAI Research Foundation and Breaking Point, and you should be able to download the PDF. It's probably 10 or 12 pages, something like that. But I want to highlight some of its conclusions. Now, remember, this is April 2020, a little over a year before the Champlain Towers South tragedy. And on page 5, again, we all know that the reality is everything deteriorates. But here's an excerpt talking about boards and their attitudes, the choices they make. Arguably, the biggest factors affecting how and when infrastructure damage is addressed are the association board's attitude and perspective. And this survey revealed a wide disparity in board philosophies. Again, untrained boards kind of following their nose to the future. While some boards are proactive and highly transparent with homeowners, the majority, key word there, are reticent to increase assessments or often fail to plan long-term for infrastructure maintenance, I want to say entirely. In postponing inspections, reserve studies, and ultimately complete repairs or renovations, doing the projects themselves, boards often end up facing an exponentially more comprehensive and expensive project in the long run. Basically saying what that Fram oil filter commercial was saying, pay me now or pay me later. And boards focusing on saving money by not raising assessments to the point where they could offset or pay money to do the projects. And in the end, that being a very poor financial decision. So standing all by itself, it's a bad financial decision to not take care of the property. So the conclusion of that document was for a building to age successfully, update reserve study regularly, get fresh information, fund the reserves as recommended, meaning put the cash into reserves that you know you're going to need to spend. Number 3, following on that, spend the reserves as recommended. Do your projects on schedule when they're small. Don't let them get big and expensive. Again, no word there about safety. And number 4, perform the periodic infrastructure inspections by an architect or engineer to get that insight that you need from someone who is a subject matter expert in building structures. Reserve study people are subject matter experts in budgeting and cash flow. And there's a value to infrastructure inspections. And again, this was a little over a year before Champlain Towers South, which opened up an entirely new consequence, and that's life safety. Okay, a little more explaining what's going on here. This is a rough budget profile pie chart of a financially and physically healthy association. 75% of their budget coming in, being set aside to be used for the operating expenses, management, janitorial, utilities, insurance, all those kinds of things, and roughly 25% going towards reserves, transferring from the cash coming in and then just transferring it over to the reserve fund. Now, in our evaluation, in our studies, most associations of all types and sizes and locations need between 15 and 40% of their total budget going to reserves. But makes a nice pie chart just to use a simple number of 25%. So that's a good number. Anyway, that 25% pays for the ongoing deterioration of roofing, painting, asphalt, boilers, elevators, carpeting, pool surfaces, all those kinds of things that deteriorate a little each day, a little each week, a little each month. That's a healthy association. All right. And what we found is all too commonly in our industry, we had treasurers that were doing a good job of paying the same operating expenses, but minimizing the monthly assessments by minimizing the reserve funding. And that reserve fund among those associations was 0 to 10% of the total budget. And those treasurers saying, clever me, look how much we can trim our monthly assessments. And the thinking is those were not real costs. Well, the roof deteriorates, and that's a real cost. Everything else is a real cost. Ongoing deterioration is a real cost. If you don't pay it now, you have to pay it in the future, and you'll have to pay most likely a larger amount. So this is an underfunded association. There's too many associations like this across the country. Again, why things needed to change. It's not yet normal for boards to appropriately fund reserves. So we need to address that flaw in the industry. Now, another thing, it's common in the reserve study industry that we reach out to a subject matter expert. It's not that common that an association gets an engineering or architectural study, a report. When that's done, that informs the reserve study. And that's a great thing. It helps us see some big expenses coming down the road. Again, helping us catch those when they're small, when we can get them done in a timely manner versus waiting too long and all of a sudden the costs just get bigger and bigger. Anyway, the conclusions of those engineering and architectural reports get absorbed into the reserve study for budget and cash flow purposes. And that's a great thing. Except over the years, people have blurred the line between these two very different reports. A lot of people say, I want to get an engineering reserve study. Well, there's no such thing as an engineering reserve study. I happen to be a professional engineer, but for the last 36 years, my specialty, my subject matter expertise has been that of a reserve specialist. I'm an RS, and there's another credential called a professional reserve analyst. I held that for a few years and then just let my credential lapse because RS was, it said that I was a specialist in this field. A professional engineer or a licensed architect answers to a different set of credentials and higher authority. Conclusions in an engineering report are structural, where reserve study is all budget and cash management. The contents are controlled by engineering or architectural standards, ASTM, things like that. Whereas reserve study is controlled by National Reserve Study standards, which brings us to today. What defines what people like me in the reserve study industry do? Cyclical projects excluded in engineering and architectural reports is, I want to say, too boring for what they do. Regular repainting, resurfacing the pool, changing out the lobby furniture, changing out the carpet. That's trivial for what they're looking at. They're looking for structural things. Yet that's I almost want to say, the bread and butter of what a reserve study is, all those cyclical projects. The engineering and architectural report commonly do intrusive, that tearing things off, or destructive testing, maybe core samples, whereas a reserve study, those things are outside the scope of a reserve study, not done. Frequency every 5 or 10 years for an engineering or architectural report. This infrastructure report, less frequent. It's more common. The reserve study needs to be done because everything's changing. The starting balance, the costs, interest and inflation, the priorities of the board, all those kinds of things. And that's good because it's a lot less expensive than a engineering or architectural report. So those are the kind of the factors that brought us to this point in time where we're realizing that these engineering and architectural reports are good things. Boards aren't yet doing the reserve funding effectively as a whole. They're not appreciating that this is a life safety issue now. We saw that very clearly 2 years ago. And so this is why there needed to be some changes in our industry. Now let's shift and spend a few minutes on what changed. All right. So we had been absorbing the subject matter expert reports that we get, whether it be infrastructure inspections, a HVAC report, an asphalt report, a roofing report, even a plumbing report. We've been absorbing that into a reserve study, therefore be able to manage the necessary cash flow for that big project. And what we've done in these reserve study standards is make those infrastructure inspections very clearly appropriate to be absorbed into the reserve plan, calling for them to be absorbed into the reserve plan. Same thing with preventive maintenance on the early side of issues. If you're doing the preventive maintenance in a timely manner, that's going to extend the life of your reserve projects, make things last longer, and making it less likely that you'll have those cracks and flaws and deferred maintenance that start really deteriorating the physical bones of a building. So there's this concept that we want to build these three things together, and together that's what's going to do that's going to create a healthy situation for the association. In that CAI Research Foundation report, they talked about adding infrastructure inspections. Well, now we're adding preventive maintenance inspections, not done by the reserve study provider, but just gathering that information, absorbing that information, and making sure it exists in that budget and cash flow plan that is the reserve study, allowing the association to have the cash to get those necessary projects done. So you're going to see more subject matter experts encouraged. We're going to ask for that. We're going to ask for, do you have a preventive maintenance plan? What is it? Are you following it? Do you have an infrastructure report? Do you have any component-specific reports? Roofing, asphalt, HVAC, fire suppression equipment, whatever component-specific reports. We're going to be asking for those. And if you've got something going on, if we start to see things, we're going to start asking and maybe putting in writing recommendations that you get subject matter expert reports. Then don't expect the reserve study provider to instantly become an expert in these other areas. We're the budget and cash flow people, gathering this information and getting a plan for you to use to get to the future. Expect more disclosures, documenting who told us what, who knows what, whether that be you, the client, or the service providers that you have, more disclosures. And then a key change was the component selection. What things are appropriate for funding through reserves. It used to be a 4-part test, and we made it a little bit bigger, a little bit wider. It's now a 3-part test where it starts with the association's obligation. It's got to be an association responsibility. Then you need to be able to see and anticipate that project, and that project needs to be material in size, basically significant. You need to be able to estimate it, not a guess, and it will include all direct and related costs. We wanted to make that very clear. So this widens the net to catch one-time projects. It widens the net to very clearly articulate that projects like a major infrastructure report that can cost $50,000 to $100,000, that shows up in the reserve study. There were a number of reserve study providers that thought reserve components were only things, roofs, asphalt, but reserve projects are now any expense, calling them projects, not things. We're moving towards calling them projects to move away from anyone thinking that it has to be a tangible thing that you can touch. Another change is the old standards used to say plan forward at least 20 years. Well, now that minimum is 30 years. Or even recommending components be included that are over 30 years. Now, it's not required until it falls within the 30-year window, but we are looking forward further into the future, and more of those expensive components are going to get captured. These are the big things like maybe a new elevator system. It may be a very effective roof system. It may be a dock, not a dock, a seawall or a boat ramp, something like that has more than a 30-year life. And when you're thinking about this, that's way too far in the future. Remember, time goes quick. Days may seem to go slow, but the years go fast. And remember, reserve funding is not for the future. Reserve funding offsets ongoing deterioration. So let's talk about a 40-year boat ramp at your association. So it deteriorates in 40 years. It's going to need to be redone. It doesn't fail all at once. It fails a little bit throughout those 40 years. And so it's appropriate that everyone pay their fair little share of that deterioration along the way. It's probably going to be a big bill in 40 years, not even counting inflation. But if everyone pays their fair share along the way, it's going to work out just fine. Not going to have a crisis in the future. And I want to remind you all, we had a great webinar on this last month called Funding Reserves and What Happens If You Don't. It was all about this concept of understanding that reserves are for ongoing deterioration. You can catch that on YouTube. You can see it on our website, reservestudy.com, under webinars. It's listed there. Great webinar to help you understand that reserves are just another bill that needs to be paid. It's not charity for the future. It's not for a rainy day, nothing like that. It's just another bill that needs to be paid. And one key element in the new standards is it clearly says best practice is a site inspection-based reserve study at least every 3 years. Now, some of you live in states where there's no time cycle that's required by law, and some states have a time cycle that says update your reserve study every 5th year. Well, we're clearly saying that the sweet spot between the cost of a reserve study and the effectiveness of what you learn from it, being able to get ahead of projects and catch them while they're small, that's at the 3-year point. So I wrote my notes down here. 36% of you are annual, 27 are every 3rd year. So that's what, 65%? That's great. The majority of you in the webinar here have already gotten that message. There's value to updating on a regular basis. All right, so what's it going to look like in your actual reserve study? What differences can you expect? Well, I should start out with what's not going to change. I want to say the normal, historical, readily inspected visual assets, no change there. You're still going to get repainting, recarpeting, things that are patently obvious to the naked eye. But I want to open you to the idea that you're going to get more than visual. You have been in the past. The reserve study professionals call your elevator company, we call your plumber, we call your HVAC service people to get insight into what's going on with those assets. So I want to make sure you're connecting the past to the future. But we're going to, as I said, going to have some more disclosures. So we are not to be counted on for your safety inspection. But if we see something that is patently obvious to us, we're going to document it, we're going to photograph it, and we may put it in writing, basically putting you on notice that we saw it and you were told. So we're going to be an extra pair of eyes to help you maintain safety at your association. And we're going to be a little quicker to reach out to subject matter experts. We may have in the past looked at this asphalt and says it's failed. You need to totally resurface the asphalt, remove and replace, and that's that and move on. But when we see extreme deterioration, we're more likely going to reach out and get something in writing, phone notes, email correspondence, or maybe a report from subject matter experts. So that happens in the office, reaching out. And those subject matter expert reports may be like the Marapato engineering report that was prepared in, I think it was in 2018, got a 2020 date on this. I bet this was the updated version. It is. They did a 2018 version and a 2020 version that they learned of shortly before they collapsed. But you can see big numbers here. The reserve study is the place to gather this information, be able to communicate it to the association and have them now have a plan knowing how much is going to take in a special assessment, how much is going to take in a loan, how much is going to take in higher assessments to make this thing work so they can get things done at their association. So it goes from structure to preventive maintenance. Again, the other side of the coin, the early side, we're going to be asking for and encouraging preventive maintenance plans and schedules. We want you to take care of the property. Doing that, taking good care of the property, will minimize your expenses at the property. So we want you caring for the property, being proactive, because best way to deal with the problem is to prevent it. So take good care of your assets. That minimizes service calls, that minimizes breakdowns, that minimizes equipment replacement. And from my point of view, it maximizes the useful life. So if you can get 20 years out of a roof instead of just 15, if you can get to 25 years out of a fence instead of just 20, that's great for your reserve planning. You don't have to replace as often, going to minimize your reserve funding. And you're going to see more across the country, more long life components, things that are over 40 years, where we're slicing that up into 40 pieces and saying, hey, pay your 1/40th portion this year. Whether it be a chain link tennis court fence that's slow to deteriorate and on a 40-year component, really not all that expensive, 20 some grand. Or it may be something like boilers, where you need to replace it every 40 years. You may need to do a major overhaul at the halfway point, but we call this overlapping cycles. You see $40,000, almost $100,000. These are big projects. We want to make sure those are in there and everyone is paying their, in this situation, 1/40th share. And again, going all the way to the other end of the spectrum, budgeting for preventive maintenance. If it's a significant expense, like this is a professional balcony inspection, this is appropriate for this association, it's almost $20,000. And fund it through reserves. That way the money accumulates and it's there to be spent to take good care of the property. Let's run this by. 3-part test. Is it common area? Yes. Is it something that we can reasonably anticipate? Yes. We've learned that this needs to happen at your association, or this association, I should say, every year. Is it above a significant expense? Yes. 20 grand is significant. So we're going to apply that 3-part test over and over and over again. Same for the infrastructure report. A 10-year report, that's a big engineering or architectural report. $82,500 for this property every 10 years. Just got done, so we have a good cost basis on this. It's not a thing. This will be maybe a piece of paper, many pages. It may be a PDF. It's not a roof tile. It's not a chunk of asphalt, but it's 3-part test. It's a common area project to take care of your physical property. It is reasonably anticipated, and it's a significant expense. So you're going to see this fold into reserves. Okay, bringing it to conclusion here. What have we learned? What do these changes do? What changes are these standards, these updated reserve size standards going to make in your life? How's it going to make your life better? Well, we have to appreciate that reserve funding has now been upgraded to a life safety issue. It's not just a budget issue. It used to be a budget issue, but now we appreciate that it's a bigger concept here. The property is at risk and lives are at risk. Life in an association will be a little more expensive, especially for those associations who have been ignoring the cost, those who have been underfunding reserves. We want to encourage the new normal to be funding reserves on an ongoing basis so everyone pays their fair share. If you take care of it today, tomorrow will take care of itself. And the asterisk here for how many measures do we have here? We had 8% plus 12%, about 20% of the attendees here in this webinar are managers. We're going to encourage you to not be sitting in the watching, but to be proactive and coach the board forward. Tell them this is important. It's not just something they can kick the can down the road. That was the old way. The new way is to everyone pay their fair share. All right? We want to make sure that everyone appreciates there is a life cycle cost to everything. When you go buy a car, you don't buy the car, spend the 40, 50, 60 grand or whatever it costs nowadays, and that's that. You have ongoing costs. There's a sticker on the window of that new car telling you roughly what to expect. There's an ongoing cost of running an association, taking care of the physical property, and that includes the ongoing deterioration of the major components. This picture was at a property I inspected not long after Champlain Tower South. I liked the way the board was quick to get this up. They're a board that is not focusing on minimizing assessments. They're being wise, focusing on taking great care of the property. They know that taking great care of the property is going to return great, strong home values, pride of ownership, great place to be able to bring your friends to visit. Look at this. We all want the structure to be perfect. Now, nothing's perfect, but you can look at the deterioration of the paint right here, but I like their attitude. Please let us know about anything that isn't right. They've enlisted the eyes of all the homeowners to help them see what's not right. And together, their style, their theme, our association is going to be well maintained. I like that. And if you still need more motivation, my homework for you is to go on YouTube and search for Pro Tech Scott Stewart. And Scott Stewart was the on-site manager of Champlain Tower South. Champlain Tower South collapsed early on a Thursday morning. So he missed being on-site during the collapse by just a few hours. And this is a sobering conversation. He does an interview here and he talks about what was happening at the association leading up to this event. And boy, this will get your attention. It's 52 minutes, so it's an hour well spent. Find yourself a quiet place and listen to this, and you'll begin to learn what it's like when things have gone wrong. And I think I mentioned Champlain Tower South was our client. We delivered their reserve study in, I think, February of 2020, packaging that news that it's going to be real expensive to take care of the property. And they just plain ran out of time. And of course, the result is tragic. And it was sobering. It was unsettling to stand on the site and just, it's right by the waterfront there, but I felt like all I was smelling was tragedy. And this is real. And this is why these standards have changed. So what have we learned? Deterioration is expensive. It's predictable. It's ongoing. You have to address it. Find out if an issue is cosmetic or significant. Don't just presume something is minor. Get a subject matter expert on your team. And remember, the most economical solution is commonly not the best solution. Do the things right. Give your association what it needs. Fix it as it needs to be fixed. Remember, the association is expensive. You got to let go of it. Trying to pretend that it's going to be cheap. It's not. And build culture at your association. Boards and the owners need to be together in understanding that we are here to take care of our home. And the boards need to help sell the owners and communicate to the owners that there's a cost to running this thing, just like a cost to running a vehicle, putting the oil in it, putting the fuel in it, replacing your filters, all that kind of stuff. It's just expensive running an association, and they need to appreciate that. The benefit, of course, is safety, budget stability, maximize property values. Great results, great return on that investment. But boards and the owners need to get together in this. Fighting each other is basically a destructive situation. And that brings me to the end of my prepared content, and I've lost my mouse here. There we go. So if you want more, we have a treasure trove, a deep library of resources at our website, reservestudy.com, articles, videos, ideas. If you want a proposal, you can go click on a button there at reservestudy.com and get a proposal, find out how much it would cost for us to be on your team. We also have those videos on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. So there are webinars like this one, 20-some, 35 minutes, things like that. We've also broken down most of them into bite-sized pieces. So you can find a lot of great resources there. And feel free to subscribe to our channel. It's just free, great stuff. So every time we have a new video, you'll get notified. One other great resource, generally free one, is you plan it. It's our online reserve calculator. It's user-friendly, easy to make changes, all calculations per National Reserve Study standards. Basically, it allows you to test all your what-if ideas. What if we move this project out? What if we fund less? What if we fund more and accelerate how fast we're strengthening our reserve fund? What if we get higher interest? All these kinds of things. Great thing is it's free for the budget season for our professional reserve study clients. They can access it, basically unlimited number of what if analyses. Or if you're a reader, you can order a copy of our desktop reference, Understanding Reserves, to help you remember basic reserve planning concepts. You can download Chapter 1 for free from our website. And if you like it, of course, just order it on Amazon. Another great resource we have is our weekly 30-minute podcast for boards called HOA Insights, Common Sense for Common Areas. New episodes drop every Monday to encourage and equip boards to have more success at their association. That's a different format than we have here at webinars. We're generally doing webinars monthly. We have these 30-minute podcasts weekly. Listen or subscribe from your favorite podcast platform or on our YouTube channel or from the podcast's homepage, www.commonareas.org. That's commonareas.org. And with that, I will turn the microphone over to Paige. We'll coordinate our Q&A time together today.